America is the greatest country in the world, and San Diego is America's finest city. Good morning. Appreciate you being here very much. Listen, I just want to go right to the former ambassador of the United Nations, Mr. John Bolton. Mr. Bolton, how are you, sir?
Fine. Glad to be with you.
Appreciate you very much. And I have to tell you this. You are the reason I got into radio. I've been meaning to talk to you for a long time about this. I've always wanted to get into radio, but I was a little too scared to get behind the microphone, you know. But you came to Yale, and this was in 2006, and spoke to the Yale Political Union.
Right.
And I was in the audience, and I was so shocked at the behavior of the student body, the booing and the hissing and the banging on desks when they disagreed with you. I wrote an editorial for the newspaper. 2 girls had a college radio station. They invited me on. I turned on the microphone and I said, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I've always wanted to tell you, thank you for that moment and for coming to Yale on that day, because here we all are today.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying it. I was just back at Yale speaking to the political union on Monday, and the left at Yale is still just as incoherent as it ever was.
And I'll never forget when a student stood up in the front right of the stage, and said, Mr. Bolton, if we have nuclear weapons, who are we to tell Iran that they also can't have nuclear weapons? And I remember thinking, scared to get behind the microphone for the first time, but you came to Yale in 2006 and spoke to the Yale Political Union, and I went and I was just shocked at how disrespectful everyone in the audience was towards you. Whenever you'd say something, they just boo you and hiss you and bang on desks. It was unbelievable. So I wrote an editorial for the newspaper, and 2 girls had a college radio station. They invited me on, and as soon as they turned on the microphone, I said, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So because you came to school that one day, we're all here today. So I appreciate everything you've been doing.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear that. I was just back at Yale on Monday speaking to the political union, and I can tell you that the left there is just as incoherent today as they were back then and back when I was an undergraduate in the 60s. It hasn't changed a bit.
It's unbelievable because Yale has such a great conservative tradition in pockets as well, so it's very confusing. But I'll never forget that there was a kid who stood up in the front row on the right-hand side of the stage and said, Ambassador Bolton, if we have nuclear weapons, who are we to tell Iran that they also can't have nuclear weapons? And I expected the whole crowd just, it would be like, what is this guy talking about? And everyone's like, yeah, good point, guy. I'm like, what? What do you remember how do you respond to that nonsense?
Well, I think I was in the government then. I was probably pretty restrained. I would have given him a different answer earlier this week.
This is the overall question that I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. Why are we involved in the United Nations? Just open blank question. What benefit do we get out of the United Nations?
Well, I think we're in because of force of habit as much as anything else. But the fact is, a lot of our friends and allies do put great store in the UN, and it can benefit us to use the UN and Security Council resolutions from time to time. I think there are parts of the UN system that do good work, the specialized agencies that you don't hear much about in technical or humanitarian fields. But the big problem with the UN is its political decision-making bodies, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, which are just hopelessly deadlocked between the United States and third world countries and authoritarian countries. So a lot of people are very frustrated. There's no question about it. Many Americans want to get out. I think the answer instead is to change the way the UN is funded. Right now it's funded through mandatory contributions for most agencies. We pay 22%, 27% for peacekeeping. I'd change that and make it all voluntary. And I'd say that the principle is we should pay for what we want and insist that we get what we pay for. If we could put that in place, it would be a revolution.
Interesting. Doesn't China only pay 3%?
Right, and that's because their economic statistics are designed in a way, I think actually, that boost their economic performance beyond what it is. It's a very complicated equation. And it's designed to make sure that the United States pays the most that they can extract from us.
Yeah, interesting. I guess my biggest concern is, and do you feel that there's a problem with the UN in that we justify these third world destructive dictatorships by having Syria and these other nations in the Human Rights Council? And they're the ones.
You're right. We give them legitimacy
by
acting as if they really are the equal of the United States. One nation one vote, as they say. A lot of people will say, look, if you need the UN because everybody has to have a place where they can come and kind of sound off. Well, if that's all you need, just rent Yankee Stadium for a month every year. After the baseball season's over, everybody can come and sound off, and that'd be the end of it. I mean, people are the defense of the United Nations is reduced to real triviality because people, its defenders have a near religious view. They're just afraid to admit it's got problems. Because they worry if they do so, people will say that's an excuse to get out of it. But in fact, by ignoring the problems, by denying them, by refusing to deal with them, they just consign the institution to even greater irrelevance.
Do you see a problem with it's what seems to me to be a continued reliance on the United Nations as justification for our military operations in our best interest?
Well, I think it's certainly a problem in the Obama administration. There's simply no doubt he views legitimacy. This is the same thing John Kerry called in the 2004 campaign the global test, that legitimacy for the American use of force depends on the consent of other countries rather than the decisions by the executive and legislative branches of the United States. And I think that's a fatal mistake because there will come a case, and probably sooner rather than later, where we're not going to have a lot of support for a very hard position we need to take. And it may only be a few countries in the world, for example, coming to the aid of Israel in a real crisis where our European friends won't stand with us, the third world will be against us, and we will need to do what we need to do to protect our own interests. So I think this is a basic philosophical split between the left and the Democratic Party, and I would say the overwhelming majority of Americans who, if you really ask them, the man on the street, do you think we need the permission of other countries to protect our interests? They'd say, of course not.
Interesting. I mean, Libya is a perfect example. The Arab League said it was okay, so now we're good. But they never asked Congress. And I'm against actions in Libya, but the justification that the UN says it's okay, I find that to be a disturbing trend.
Well, it goes back, to the Truman administration where that argument was first made, and that argument was rejected then. The president has whatever constitutional power he has because it's conferred by the Constitution. It can't be expanded or modified or enhanced by some action by the UN or any other international body.
Now, try to keep reminding people as much as possible that in 2012 we're electing first and foremost a commander-in-chief, not an economist-in-chief. So as you're electing a commander-in-chief, what position would you like them to have towards the United Nations?
Well, honestly, this is one of the reasons I'm thinking myself of running for president, because I'm so worried about the direction that Obama has taken us for the first 2 years of his term. If he gets another 4 years, 6 more years in toto, I think the U.S. will be left very substantially weakened. I think we need a president who understands the frailties of the United Nations, who understands what benefits there are, can clearly distinguish between the two, but who fundamentally pursues the best interest of the United States. That's what we elect a president to do. We don't elect a philosopher king. We're not looking for a platonic guardian. We're not looking for a citizen of the world, which is what I think at bottom President Obama really would like to be remembered as. We want an advocate. We want a champion. We want, as you say, a commander-in-chief, as the Constitution says, to protect us, protect our interests and our values and our friends around the world.
We don't want a citizen of the world, but do we also want America to be the police of the world? And what's your take on that versus more of a Ron Paul approach, less intervention?
Well, I favor intervening when we need to. I don't think there ought to be a rule that you intervene so much or you don't intervene. I think that the fact is we do live in a very dangerous world. There are a lot of threats to our interest. We are the only global power. That's why, and I know it's frustrating to many people, we seem to get drawn into so many controversies around the world. We're the only one that has an interest in every part of the world. Now, that doesn't mean that we use military force without thinking through the consequences. I think we do want the overwhelming range of international issues to be resolved peacefully, and it's not that we're acting simply because we want good order in Lower Slobovia somewhere. When we act in a military fashion, it ought to be because there are American interests at stake.
Would you say there's American interests in Libya, or was that just because there were Well,
not
we wanted
the way
more stability.
not the way President Obama has defined it. I would have said very early in this conflict, after Gaddafi threatened to return to international terrorism, that made him a threat to us and to our allies, and a prompt, decisive, telling blow against the regime then could have resolved this 6 weeks ago. Instead, the president's got us into what I called in an article in the New York Post yesterday, I think, a quagmire. He says he wants to protect innocent Libyan civilians. He says he wants Gaddafi out, but he only is willing to use military force to protect Libyan civilians. Well, who is he protecting them against? He's protecting them against Gaddafi. He's the one who's threatening the innocent Libyan civilians. How can you guarantee the protection of the civilians if you leave Gaddafi in power? I mean, it's a completely circular argument on his part, and I think what we're seeing is the kind of abdication of American leadership that could leave Gaddafi in power. That's bad enough as it is, but even worse, that kind of strategic defeat for the United States sends signals throughout the Middle East and around the world that this administration is not prepared to defend American interests. It shows it's not ready for prime time, and that means it leaves us open to more pressure, more challenges, more risk.
Absolutely. My last question for you, and this falls in the category of things that are still going on, but we don't talk about because there's other things going on as well. Somali pirates, there's like hundreds of people who are kept captives by the Somali pirates. What does the American military do there?
Well, we should go in and clean the pirate bases out, eliminate the piracy threat, and do whatever it takes to make sure they can't reestablish bases in Somalia. Now, this idea it's hardly new or creative on my part to say that. It's been discussed in NATO councils, and our European friends say they're very reluctant to use military force because they're afraid that the pirates will accuse them of violating their human rights. So faced with that argument, we have decided to do nothing. It's just incredible. It shows the way in which the left wraps itself around the axle and gets so incapable of protecting itself that we're back in the Middle Ages, in effect.
Oh, Ambassador Bolton, I have to tell you this story real quick. At Yale, you'll get a kick out of this. At Yale, the short of it is, I was going through, they had a protest, and they had an area set up called Tolerance Village, and every building was a different liberal tactic. And like free healthcare and whatnot. And one of them was barless prisons.
Oh, God.
And I said, excuse me, hippie girl, how do you propose to keep the prisoners in the jail? And I swear to you, Ambassador, she said, shrubbery.
This is why I love going back to Yale. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel with these people.
Thank you for talking to our liberal youth, and maybe we can knock some sense into them. Ambassador Bolton, appreciate you very much. Best of luck with your decision whether or not to run. I hope you get engaged in the conversation more.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks again for having me.
Have a wonderful day. UN Ambassador, former UN Ambassador John Bolton.